Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. You know how this works. You send in your questions, we pick the most interesting ones, and we really get into it.
That's right. And today we're looking at a question about God's name.
Yeah, someone asked, is it Jehovah or Yahweh? And to get to the bottom of this, we're taking a look at a YouTube video by Wes Huff called Is God's Name Jehovah or Yahweh? Straightforward title, right?
Absolutely.
But I think we're going to find that things get a lot more complex than you might think.
Oh, for sure. Just thinking about how those two names, Jehovah and Yahweh, even came to be, it's a long and winding road. It kind of reveals how much reverence people have had for the name of God.
Well, to understand that, we got to go all the way back to the beginning, like way, way back to the book of
You
Exodus.
mean Moses and the burning bush?
That's the one, Exodus chapter 3. It's like the origin story of God's name, right?
Totally. That's where Moses first hears the name YHVH.
YHVH, the tetragrammaton, those four Hebrew letters. And right off the bat, we run into a problem.
Right.
How do you even say it?
Right. It's one of those things that, well, we don't know for sure how it was pronounced in ancient Hebrew.
But I've heard people say Yahweh.
Yahweh is what a lot of scholars think is the most likely pronunciation based on the evidence we do have.
Okay, so Yahweh is probably it. But here's another thing. When I look at my English Bible, I see Lord printed in all caps. Where's Yahweh?
Yeah, so that all caps Lord, that's basically a stand-in for the tetragrammaton.
So are they trying to hide the name? What's the deal?
It's more about reverence than secrecy. See, there's this really old Jewish tradition of not saying God's name out loud to avoid misusing it or taking it in vain. It's seen as, well, a little too holy to just throw around.
That makes sense. It's
Yeah.
showing respect.
Exactly. So instead of saying YHVH, they'd say Adonai, which means my Lord.
Makes sense. So that tradition is why we see Lord instead of Yahweh in a lot of Bibles. But doesn't using a substitute make people forget God's actual name?
I mean, that's a good question. It's a complicated issue because we're talking about beliefs and traditions that evolved over thousands of years. We got to remember the cultural context. This tradition had a huge impact. It even spread to other translations of the Bible.
You mean like how it went from Hebrew to Greek?
Exactly. The Septuagint, which is the ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, used the word Kyrios to replace the tetragrammaton. And Kyrios also means Lord.
Okay, so they kept substituting. Did that happen in other languages too?
Yep. In Latin translations like the Vulgate, they went with Dominus, which, you guessed it, means Lord. So this practice carried on through the centuries and across different languages.
Wow, God's name really got around, even if it wasn't, actually said. And you mentioned that some Jewish people still follow that tradition, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Many Jewish people today use Hashem when referring to God, and Hashem literally translates to the name. So it's a way of acknowledging God without actually saying the tetragrammaton out loud.
Okay, so we've got the likely pronunciation Yahweh, and we've got this tradition of substituting the name with words like Lord. But how did Jehovah enter the picture? This is where it gets really wild, right?
Right. So get this. During the Middle Ages, scribes started adding vowel points from the word Adonai onto the tetragrammaton.
Vowel points, what do you mean?
It's like little markings around the Hebrew letters to show you how to pronounce them.
Oh, okay, got it.
But here's the thing. These vowel points weren't meant to actually pronounce the name. They were a reminder to substitute Adonai, like a little note saying, don't say this, say that.
So they combine the letters of God's name with the vowels from the word Lord. I can see how that might cause some problems.
Big time. Over time, languages change, right? The sounds of letters shift. And W sounds morphed into V sounds, and I sounds became J sounds in certain languages.
So what you're saying is that this combination of letters and vowel points, designed to make sure people didn't say God's name, accidentally created a whole new word.
Precisely. And that word is, as you know, Jehovah. And that's how we ended up with that name.
It's really wild to think about. We started with a burning bush and an unpronounceable name. Then there were all these substitutions. Then scribes tried to avoid saying the name, and that led to a whole new name being invented.
It really shows how language changes over time and how culture influences our understanding of even the most fundamental things, like the name of God.
It's like a reminder that even the words we think are set in stone have this whole history behind them.
Absolutely. Words can go on quite the journey.
Well, that's all the time we have for today's deep dive. It's incredible how a simple question about God's name can lead to such a fascinating exploration.
And who knows what other words we use every day might have a hidden history just as interesting as this one.
So I got to ask you, listener, what words or names have you come across that make you wonder, What's the story behind that? Go out there and explore. You never know what you'll find. And we'll be back soon with another deep dive.
See ya then.